My hands trembled as I adjusted the pearl necklace against my throat for the third time in 10 minutes. The burgundy blouse Emma had insisted I buy last month felt too young, too hopeful, too everything I wasn't sure I should be at 67. But here I sat in Romano's Italian bistro, clutching my purse like a lifeline, while the familiar scents of garlic and basil swirled around me, making my stomach flutter with something that might have been hunger or might have been pure terror. "Grammy, you have to try," Emma had pleaded just 3 days ago, her 24-year-old face glowing with the confidence that only comes from never having your heart broken by 43 years of marriage ending in a cemetery. "His name is David. He's 70, retired teacher like Grandpa was, and he loves classic movies. You two are perfect for each other." Perfect. The word tasted bitter in my mouth as I sipped my ice water, the condensation making my fingers slip against the glass. How could anyone be perfect when Thomas's aftershave still lingered in our bedroom closet, when his coffee mug still sat in the dishwasher because I couldn't bear to put it away? Perfect was what Thomas and I had been, or what I'd convinced myself we'd been during those long nights when grief made me rewrite our history in golden ink. The restaurant hummed with the comfortable chatter of families and couples, the clink of silverware against plates, creating a symphony that made me feel both welcomed and utterly alone. A young couple at the table next to me leaned across their pasta, whispering secrets that made them both laugh, and I remembered being that young, that certain that love would last forever. The woman wore a simple gold band, just like the one I still twisted around my finger when I was nervous. Like now. I checked my watch, 6:58 p.m. Emma had arranged for us to meet at 7, giving me just enough time to question every decision that had led me to this moment. The hostess, a girl barely older than Emma, kept glancing my way with the particular look of sympathy reserved for women dining alone. I wanted to tell her I was waiting for someone, that this wasn't just a lonely widow treating herself to dinner, but the words stuck in my throat like dry bread. The truth was, I hadn't been on a first date since 1976. Nixon was president, gas cost 60 cents a gallon, and I was a 21-year-old education major who thought she knew everything about love because she'd read Jane Austen novels until the pages fell apart. Thomas had picked me up in his powder blue Buick, his hair slicked back with too much pomade, wearing a tie that his mother had obviously chosen. We'd gone to see All the President's Men, and I'd spent more time watching his profile in the flickering light than following the plot. That was a lifetime ago. 2 children, 5 grandchildren, 3 moves, countless anniversaries, and 1 devastating diagnosis later, I was a different woman entirely. My hair was silver now instead of chestnut brown, cut into what the stylist called a sophisticated bob, but what I thought of as old lady hair. My hands showed every year of washing dishes, changing diapers, and holding Thomas's hand through chemotherapy. The laugh lines around my eyes had deepened into permanent creases that told stories of joy and sorrow in equal measure. The door chimed, and my heart lurched. A man in his 70s entered, scanning the restaurant with the same nervous energy I felt coursing through my veins. He was tall, still broad-shouldered despite his age, with a full head of white hair that reminded me of Sean Connery in his later movies. This had to be David. This had to be the man Emma had described as distinguished and kind, with the most beautiful smile. But something was wrong. Something was terribly, impossibly wrong. Because as he turned his head, searching for his dinner companion, I saw a face that I knew as well as my own reflection. A face that had aged 47 years since the last time I'd seen it, but a face that belonged to someone who was supposed to be buried in St. Mary's Cemetery, 3 plots over from where Thomas would rest for eternity. The man was Michael Brennan, my college boyfriend, my first love. The man I'd left standing at the altar in June of 1977. He spotted me across the restaurant, and I watched his expression shift from polite anticipation to shock, then to something that might have been joy or might have been horror. I couldn't tell which, because my own face was frozen in a mask of disbelief. His eyes, still that impossible shade of blue that had made my knees weak when I was 20, widened as recognition dawned. For a moment, we simply stared at each other across 47 years of silence, across a restaurant full of strangers who had no idea that the earth had just shifted beneath my sensibly heeled feet. The sounds of the restaurant faded to a whisper, the clinking silverware and murmured conversations becoming white noise against the thundering of my heart. Michael took a step forward, then stopped, his hand gripping the back of an empty chair. I could see his chest rising and falling beneath his navy blazer, could see the same uncertainty that was surely written across my own face. He looked good, weathered but healthy, with the kind of tan that spoke of retirement spent gardening or playing golf. His posture was straight, confident, in a way that suggested he'd lived a life without the crushing regrets that had bent my shoulders forward. "Margaret?" His voice carried across the distance between us, and hearing my name in his familiar baritone made my breath catch. No one had called me Margaret in decades. To Thomas, I'd been Maggie. To my children, I was Mom. To my grandchildren, Grammy. But Michael had always called me Margaret, pronouncing each syllable with the careful attention of someone who found beauty in simple words. I tried to speak, tried to say his name, but nothing came out except a small, strangled sound that made the couple at the next table look over with concern. I cleared my throat and tried again. Michael. The name felt foreign on my tongue, like speaking a language I'd once been fluent in but hadn't used in decades. "What are you? How are you?" He moved closer, weaving between tables with the careful gait of someone who'd learned to navigate the world with joints that no longer moved like they once did. When he reached my table, he hesitated, his hand hovering over the back of the chair across from me. "May I?" he asked, and I nodded because I couldn't trust my voice to form actual words. He sat down slowly, never taking his eyes off my face, as if I might disappear if he looked away for even a second. The waiter appeared instantly, that special radar that servers develop for awkward situations clearly pinging. "Can I get you gentlemen started with something to drink?" The young man's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Scotch," Michael said, his voice rough. "Make it a double." "The same," I whispered, though I hadn't drunk hard liquor since Thomas's funeral. The waiter departed, leaving us alone with 4 decades of unfinished business spread across the white tablecloth between us. Michael's hands rested on the table, and I could see they were shaking slightly. His wedding ring was gone, I noticed, leaving only a pale band of skin where it had been. "Margaret," he said again, and this time my name sounded like a prayer. "I can't believe. Emma never said. I mean, when she told me about her grandmother, she said your name was Maggie, and your last name was—" He trailed off, shaking his head. I should have known. I should have asked more questions. Emma, my granddaughter, had set me up with my first love. The cosmic joke of it made me want to laugh and cry at the same time. Instead, I sat there like a statue, trying to process the impossibility of the moment. "You know Emma?" I finally managed to ask. "She works at the community center where I volunteer, teaches art to seniors." Michael ran a hand through his white hair, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. "She's been after me for months to try dating again. Said her grandmother was in the same boat, recently widowed, lonely. He paused, his blue eyes searching my face. Thomas? I nodded, not trusting my voice. The simple acknowledgement of my husband's death, spoken by the man I'd left for him, felt like a betrayal of them both. I'm sorry, Michael said, and I could hear the sincerity in his voice. I heard about the wedding in '77, you know. Helen Morrison told me you'd married a teacher from the high school. I was happy for you. Eventually. The drinks arrived, and I grabbed my scotch with both hands, needing something to do with them before I did something embarrassing like reach across the table to touch his face, to verify that he was real and not some hallucination brought on by grief and loneliness. The liquor burned going down, but it loosened something in my chest that had been wound tight since the moment he'd walked through the door. I thought you were dead, I said suddenly, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I mean, I thought Emma said David was 70, and you're 73 next month. Michael's mouth twitched into what might have been a smile. She must have gotten her wires crossed somewhere along the way. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on us like humidity before a storm. I studied his face, cataloging the changes that time had wrought. The boy I'd known had become a man, and the man had become this silver-haired stranger who still made my heart race like I was 20 years old again. Why did you leave? The question slipped out before I could stop it, raw and honest and 47 years too late. Michael's jaw tightened, and he took a long sip of his scotch before answering. Because you asked me to wait, and I couldn't. Because standing in that church, watching everyone's faces when it became clear you weren't coming, he shook his head. I left because I was young and stupid and proud, and because I couldn't stand the idea of everyone in town knowing that Margaret Sullivan had decided I wasn't good enough after all. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. That wasn't why I stopped, overwhelmed by the complexity of trying to explain a decision I'd spent nearly 50 years trying to understand myself. Then why? His voice was gentle now, curious rather than angry. I've wondered for so long, Margaret. I think I deserve to know why. He did deserve to know. He deserved to know 47 years ago, but I'd been too much of a coward to face him, too terrified of my own feelings to trust them, too convinced that love was supposed to feel safe and predictable, not like standing on the edge of a cliff with your heart in your throat. I was scared, I said finally, the truth feeling strange and vulnerable in my mouth. You wanted to move to California, remember? You wanted us to pack up everything and drive west and see what happened. You talked about adventure and possibilities, and I wanted those things too, but I was terrified. My parents thought you were reckless, thought I was throwing my life away on a boy who would never settle down. Michael nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. So you chose Thomas instead. Safe, dependable Thomas, who wanted to stay in town and teach high school and have Sunday dinners with your parents. Yes, the admission felt like a confession, and I loved him, Michael. I really did love him. We had a good life together, a good marriage, 2 wonderful children, 5 grandchildren who are the light of my life. I don't regret the choice I made. But even as I said it, I wondered if it was entirely true. Sitting across from Michael, feeling my pulse quicken at the sight of his smile, I wondered what my life might have been if I'd been brave enough to choose love over security, passion over predictability. Tell me about California, I said, desperate to change the subject before I said something I couldn't take back. Did you make it there? Michael's eyes lit up, and for a moment I could see the boy he'd been, the dreamer who'd wanted to chase sunsets and possibilities. I did. Spent 30 years teaching high school English in San Diego. Never married, though. Came close a few times, but he shrugged, and I heard volumes in that simple gesture. No children? None of my own, but I had thousands over the years, taught 3 generations of some families. He smiled, and the expression transformed his weathered face. I loved it. The kids, the challenge, even the difficult parents. I like to think I made a difference. I was sure he had. Michael had always been gifted with words, able to make even the most boring subjects come alive with his enthusiasm. I could picture him in a classroom, inspiring teenagers to fall in love with literature the way he'd once inspired me to fall in love with life. "What brought you back?" I asked. "My mother. She had a stroke 5 years ago, needed someone to take care of her. I'd been planning to retire anyway, so I came home." His expression grew somber. "She passed last year. Pancreatic cancer. I'm sorry. She was always kind to me. She remembered you, right up until the end. She'd ask about you sometimes, wonder how you were doing." Michael's voice grew soft. "I think she always—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. I could feel the weight of all the hopes and dreams that had died with our relationship, all the what-ifs that had haunted us both. The waiter returned to take our dinner orders, and we fumbled through the menu like teenagers, both of us clearly thrown by the surreal nature of the situation. I ordered the chicken marsala without really reading the description. Michael chose the veal parmesan, then immediately second-guessed himself. "Actually, make that the salmon," he said, and I remembered that had always been indecisive when he was nervous. When we were alone again, the silence stretched between us, comfortable and uncomfortable at the same time. There was so much to say and no way to say it all. 47 years of separate lives couldn't be summarized over dinner, no matter how many courses we ordered. "Tell me about your children," Michael said finally, and I felt my face soften the way it always did when I talked about David and Sarah. David is 45, lives in Chicago with his wife and 3 kids. He's a veterinarian, specializes in exotic animals. Sarah is 43, teaches kindergarten here in town. She has twin boys, 12 years old, and I paused, searching for the right word. They're everything. Loud and messy and brilliant and exhausting. Like their grandmother, I imagine. The compliment made me blush like a schoolgirl, and I hated myself for it. I was a grown woman, a widow, a grandmother. I shouldn't be sitting in a restaurant blushing over words from a man I hadn't seen in nearly 50 years. But God help me, I was. Our food arrived, providing a blessed distraction from the intensity of the conversation. We ate slowly, making small talk about the restaurant, the weather, the changes in town since Michael had been away. Safe topics that didn't require us to examine the minefield of our shared history. But as the evening wore on, I found myself relaxing despite everything. Michael was still the same man I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Thoughtful, funny, with a way of listening that made me feel like I was the most interesting person in the world. The years had seasoned him, given him a depth that the 26-year-old boy I'd known had only hinted at. He told me about his students, about the ones who'd gone on to become doctors and lawyers and teachers themselves. He talked about traveling through Europe the summer he turned 40, about the small apartment overlooking the Pacific where he'd spent his California years, about learning to cook for himself and discovering he had a talent for Italian food. I told him about raising my children, about the chaos and joy of those early years when Thomas and I were just figuring out how to be parents. I talked about going back to school when the kids were teenagers, earning my master's degree in library science, and working at the high school library until retirement. I described my garden, my book club, my volunteer work at the animal shelter. Normal lives, both of us. Good lives filled with purpose and meaning and small daily joys. But sitting across from each other, I could feel the pull of the road not taken, the life we might have lived together if I'd been braver, if he'd been more patient, if the world had been different. As we lingered over coffee and tiramisu, Michael reached across the table and covered my hand with his. The touch was electric, sending shivers up my arm that I hadn't felt since the last time he'd touched me. "Margaret," he said, his voice low and serious, "I need to tell you something." My heart stopped. Here it was, the other shoe I'd been waiting for all evening. He was sick. He was moving away again. He was in love with someone else. All the reasons why this impossible evening would end the way it had to end. I never stopped loving you. The words hung in the air between us like a challenge, like a confession, like a question mark at the end of everything I thought I knew about my life. I stared at him, this man who had once been the center of my universe, this stranger who somehow still felt like coming home. My hand trembled beneath his, and I could feel tears threatening to spill over. "Michael?" "I know," he said quickly. "I know it's crazy. I know we're not the same people we were. I know you loved Thomas, and I respect that. I'm not trying to compete with a ghost or rewrite history or pretend that 47 years didn't happen." He paused, his thumb stroking gently across my knuckles. "But I need you to know that you were the love of my life, Margaret. You were the standard by which I measured every other relationship, and they all came up short." I felt like I was drowning in his words, in the impossible hope they offered. Part of me wanted to pull my hand away, to stand up and walk out of the restaurant and pretend this conversation had never happened. Part of me wanted to preserve the memory of Thomas, to honor the vows I'd made, even if death had released me from them. But a larger part of me, the part that had been buried under years of being sensible and practical and grateful for what I had, wanted to lean across the table and kiss him until we were both 20 again. "I can't," I whispered, though I made no move to pull my hand away. "I can't do this, Michael. It's too much, too complicated. Thomas has only been gone 2 years, and I'm still figuring out how to be just me instead of half of something." Michael nodded, his expression understanding but determined. "I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow, Margaret. I'm not even asking you to date me, not really. I'm just asking you to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, we get a second chance. Maybe Emma set us up tonight for a reason." Emma, my matchmaking granddaughter, who had somehow managed to orchestrate the most unlikely reunion in history. I wondered if she knew, if she'd planned this all along, or if it was simply the kind of cosmic coincidence that made you believe in fate. "How long are you staying in town?" I asked, stalling for time. "As long as you'll let me." The simple answer undid me completely. Tears spilled over then, 47 years of regret and loss and longing, all pouring out at once. Michael squeezed my hand tighter, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "Don't cry," he said softly. "Please don't cry." "I'm sorry," I managed through the tears. "I'm sorry for leaving you at the altar. I'm sorry for being too scared to choose you. I'm sorry for all the years we lost." "Hey," Michael's voice was gentle but firm. "No apologies. We were kids, Margaret. We made the choices we thought were right at the time. And look at us. We survived. We built good lives." We loved other people and were loved in return. Those years weren't lost. They were just different chapters in our stories. I wiped my eyes with my napkin, embarrassed by my emotional outburst, but somehow lighter for having released it. What happens now? Now we take it one day at a time. Maybe we start with coffee tomorrow. Maybe we see a movie next week. Maybe we remember what it feels like to be young and foolish and completely crazy about someone. Michael's smile was soft and hopeful. Or maybe we decide we're too old and set in our ways for this kind of drama, and we become the best of friends who laugh about the night Emma accidentally set us up with each other. The idea of friendship felt safe, manageable. The idea of more felt terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. "Coffee sounds good," I said finally, surprised by my own courage. "Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow." Michael signaled for the check, but I insisted we split it, independent woman and all that. As we prepared to leave, he helped me with my coat, and his hands lingered on my shoulders for just a moment longer than necessary. "Margaret?" "Yes?" For what it's worth, I think Thomas was a lucky man. The compliment was so unexpected, so generous, that it took my breath away. Most men would have been jealous of the husband who'd won the woman they'd loved. But Michael, in his gracious way, was honoring both my choice and the man who'd benefited from it. We walked to the parking lot together, moving slowly, partly because of our ages, and partly because neither of us wanted the evening to end. My car was parked next to his, a red Honda Civic that looked well-maintained, but clearly had some years on it. "This is me," I said, gesturing to my practical silver sedan. We stood between our cars, the cool evening air raising goosebumps on my arms despite my coat. The parking lot was lit by harsh fluorescent lights that made everything look surreal, like a movie set or a dream. "Thank you," Michael said, and I realized he was thanking me for more than just dinner. He was thanking me for not running away, for giving us this chance to reconnect, for being brave enough to say yes to coffee tomorrow. "Thank you for being you, for still being you after all these years." He leaned down and kissed my cheek, a gentle brush of lips that sent warmth spreading through my entire body. For a moment, I let myself imagine what it would feel like to turn my head, to capture his mouth with mine, to give in to the 47 years of wondering. Instead, I got into my car and drove home through streets that looked exactly the same as they had when I'd left for dinner, but felt completely different now that my world had been turned upside down. I sat in my driveway for a long time after I'd turned off the engine, staring at the house I'd shared with Thomas, the house where I'd raised my children and buried my dreams of adventure in favor of security and certainty. It was a good house, full of happy memories and comfortable routines. But tonight, for the first time in 2 years, it felt empty in a way that had nothing to do with Thomas being gone, and everything to do with the possibility of filling it with someone new. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Michael's face across the dinner table, heard him saying my name like it was something precious. I replayed every conversation, every look, every moment of contact between us, trying to parse meaning from gesture and hope from possibility. At 3 a.m, I got up and made tea, then sat at my kitchen table with photo albums spread around me like tarot cards revealing different versions of my future. Here was my wedding to Thomas, both of us so young and serious in our formal portraits. Here were the children as babies, as toddlers, as graduates. Here was Thomas and me at our 25th anniversary party, silver-haired and content, surrounded by friends and family who loved us. But tucked into the back of one album, in a section I rarely visited, was a single photo of Michael and me from college. We were at a picnic, both of us laughing at something outside the camera's frame. His arm was around my shoulders, and I was looking up at him with an expression of pure adoration that made my chest ache even now. It kept the picture all these years, hidden it from Thomas, not out of deception, but out of some need to preserve a piece of my younger self, the girl who'd believed in grand gestures and passionate love stories. Looking at it now, I could barely remember what it felt like to be that carefree, that certain that love could conquer anything. The phone rang at 8:30, just as I was getting dressed for our coffee date. I'd changed clothes 3 times, finally settling on a soft blue sweater that Emma had always said brought out my eyes, and dark slacks that were flattering but not trying too hard. "Hello? Grammy, it's Emma. How did it go last night?" My granddaughter's voice was bright with excitement and curiosity, and I realized I had no idea how to explain what had happened. How do you tell someone that their well-meaning matchmaking had resulted in the most surreal evening of your life? "It was unexpected," I said carefully. "Unexpected good or unexpected bad? I'm not sure yet." There was a pause, and I could practically hear Emma's wheels turning. "Grammy, what happened? You sound strange." I took a deep breath, knowing that this conversation was going to happen eventually, and might as well happen now. "Emma, honey, David wasn't who you thought he was." "What do you mean? Oh, God, was he married? Creepy? Did I set you up with some kind of weirdo?" "No, nothing like that. Emma, David is Michael Brennan." Silence. Complete, stunned silence. "Michael Brennan," Emma repeated slowly. "As in your college boyfriend, Michael Brennan? As in the one you almost married, Michael Brennan?" "The very same." "Holy shit, Grammy." "Language, Emma." "Sorry, but holy shit. How is that even possible? I mean, what are the odds? Did you know? Did he know? Oh my God, I can't believe I accidentally set you up with your first love. This is like something out of a romance novel." Despite everything, I found myself smiling at her enthusiasm. Emma had always been dramatic, even as a little girl. She'd inherited it from her mother, who'd inherited it from me, though I'd spent years trying to suppress that side of my personality in favor of being practical and appropriate. "We're having coffee this morning," I said, and immediately regretted sharing that information because Emma's squeal nearly burst my eardrum. "Coffee! Grammy, this is amazing! You have to tell me everything. What did you wear? What did you talk about? Did he recognize you right away? Did you—" "Emma," I cut off her stream of questions gently but firmly. "This is very complicated, sweetheart. I need you to not make a big deal about this, okay? I don't know what's going to happen or even what I want to happen." "But Grammy, don't you see? This is fate. The universe is giving you a second chance at love." The universe. As if the cosmos had nothing better to do than meddle in the love life of a 67-year-old widow. But even as I dismissed the idea, part of me wondered if Emma might be right. What else could explain the incredible coincidence that had brought Michael and me together again after nearly 50 years? "I have to go get ready," I said, ending the conversation before Emma could launch into a full analysis of cosmic intervention and destiny. "Call me after. I want to hear everything." I hung up and looked at myself in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back at me looked nervous and excited and terrified, like someone about to bungee jump or skydive or do something equally reckless and exhilarating. Maybe that's exactly what I was doing. The coffee shop Emma had suggested was a little place downtown called the Daily Grind, the kind of trendy cafe that had sprung up in recent years to cater to the younger crowd, but had somehow managed to attract a diverse clientele. I arrived 5 minutes early, partly because I was always punctual, and partly because I wanted to choose our table, to have some small measure of control over this increasingly uncontrollable situation. I ordered a latte and found a table near the window, positioning myself so I could see the door but also watch the street outside. The morning was crisp and sunny, the kind of October day that made you believe in new beginnings and fresh starts. Michael arrived exactly on time, and my heart did that fluttering thing again when I saw him through the window. He was wearing jeans and a green sweater that made his blue eyes even more striking, and he moved with the confidence of a man who'd had all night to think about this meeting and had decided he wanted to be here. He spotted me immediately and smiled, the expression transforming his face from handsome to devastating. I smiled back before I could stop myself, and suddenly the nervousness that had been plaguing me all morning melted away, replaced by something that felt suspiciously like happiness. "Good morning, Margaret." He leaned down and kissed my cheek again, and this time I let myself enjoy the brief contact instead of analyzing it to death. "Good morning. How did you sleep?" "Like a teenager the night before prom," he admitted with a laugh as he sat down across from me. "You?" "About the same. I kept thinking I was going to wake up and discover the whole thing had been a dream." "If it was a dream, we're both having it." Michael studied my face with an intensity that made me self-conscious. "You look beautiful this morning." The compliment hit me like a physical force, and I had to look away, focusing on my latte to keep from blushing. It had been so long since a man had called me beautiful. Thomas had, of course, even near the end when cancer had stolen his strength, but not his kindness. But Thomas's compliments had felt comfortable, familiar, like putting on a well-worn sweater. Michael's felt dangerous, thrilling, like stepping into a dress that was a little too sophisticated, a little too young, but made you feel like someone you'd forgotten you could be. "Thank you," I said softly. "I've been thinking about what you said last night, about Thomas, about needing time to figure out who you are without him." Michael's voice was careful, measured. "I want you to know I understand that. I'm not trying to rush you into anything or make you feel like you have to choose between honoring his memory and exploring whatever this is between us." I looked up at him then, struck by his thoughtfulness. The Michael I'd known in college had been impulsive, passionate, someone who felt everything intensely and wanted the world to feel it with him. This Michael was still passionate. I could see it in his eyes, in the way his hands moved when he talked. But he'd learned patience, learned to consider other people's needs alongside his own. "I appreciate that," I said, "because I honestly don't know how to do this. The dating thing, I mean. Even calling it dating feels strange. I was married for 43 years, Michael. I don't know how to be with anyone else." "Then maybe we don't call it dating. Maybe we just call it reconnecting, getting to know each other again." He reached across the table and covered my hand with his, just like he had the night before, and I didn't pull away. "Tell me about your marriage. Tell me about Thomas." The request surprised me. Most men wouldn't want to hear about their potential romantic interest's deceased husband, but Michael wasn't most men, and his interest felt genuine, born out of a desire to understand me rather than compete with a ghost. "He was a good man," I said slowly, trying to find words that would do justice to 4 decades of shared life. "Steady, reliable, kind. He loved teaching, loved his students. He coached baseball for 20 years, even after our kids were too old to play. He made me laugh, even when I was furious with him." "What did you fight about?" "Money, mostly. He was a spender, I was a saver. He wanted to renovate the kitchen, I wanted to put the money into the kids' college funds. He thought we should take vacations, I thought we should be practical." I smiled, remembering. He usually won. Our kitchen is gorgeous, and some of my favorite memories are from those trips he talked me into taking. "He sounds like he balanced you out." "He did. He taught me that it was okay to enjoy life, that security didn't have to mean boring." I paused, realizing something I'd never articulated before, but I think I balanced him out too. I kept him grounded, made sure we didn't spend ourselves into bankruptcy chasing his dreams. A good partnership. Yes, it was. I looked directly at Michael, wanting him to understand. "I don't want you to think I settled for him or married him because I was afraid of you. I loved him, Michael. I chose him, and I chose well." Michael nodded, his expression serious but not hurt. I'm glad you had that you built something good with him, and I'm glad he made you happy." The generosity of his response overwhelmed me. Here was a man who could have been bitter, could have spent 47 years convincing himself that I'd made a terrible mistake in leaving him. Instead, he was celebrating the love I'd found with someone else. "What about you?" I asked. "You said you never married, but surely there was someone special." Michael's expression grew thoughtful, distant. "There were a few someones. Sarah, in my 30s, she was a nurse, wanted children desperately. We were together for 3 years, talked about marriage, but—" He shrugged. "She deserved someone who could love her completely, and I couldn't get there. Then there was Janet, in my 40s. She was divorced, had 2 teenage kids. We had a good thing for a while, but she needed more than I was able to give." "More how?" "More commitment, more certainty about the future, more willingness to build a life together instead of just enjoying each other's company." Michael's smile was sad. "I think I was always holding back, waiting for something that felt like what we had." The admission hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we should cross. I felt the weight of it, the responsibility of being someone's standard for love, someone's reason for remaining alone. "Michael, I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty," he said quickly. "I'm telling you because I want you to understand that what we had was real, was important, even if it didn't work out the way we planned." I sipped my latte, buying time to process his words. Through the window, I watched a young mother pushing a stroller, her toddler running circles around her while she tried to manage both children and her coffee. It reminded me of my own early motherhood days, when life felt chaotic but purposeful, when every day brought new challenges and small victories. "Do you regret it?" I asked, "not having children of your own?" "Sometimes, especially when I see families like yours, see what I might have had." Michael's gaze grew distant. "But then I think about all the students I influenced, all the young people I helped shape. Maybe that was my version of parenthood." "Emma adores you, you know. She talks about you all the time. Mr. Brennan this, Mr. Brennan that. She says you're the best art teacher she's ever worked with." "She's talented. Reminds me of someone I used to know who had dreams of being an artist." The reference to my abandoned artistic aspirations made me uncomfortable. I'd given up painting when David was born, telling myself I was too busy with diapers and dishes and the daily demands of motherhood. But the truth was, I'd been afraid of pursuing something that felt selfish, impractical, too much like the dreamer I'd been when I'd loved Michael. "That was a long time ago," I said dismissively. "Was it? Emma showed me some sketches she found in your house. Birds, flowers, incredibly detailed. She said you did them recently." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. Those sketches were private, just something I did to keep my hands busy during the long evenings when the house felt too quiet. I hadn't shown them to anyone, hadn't even considered them real art. "They're nothing, just doodling." "They're beautiful, Margaret. You still have the gift." The conversation was veering into territory that felt too intimate, too much like the Michael of old, who'd pushed me to take risks, to believe in possibilities I wasn't ready to embrace. I changed the subject, asking him about his volunteer work at the community center, about the town changes he'd noticed since returning. We talked easily for over an hour, the conversation flowing like we'd seen each other yesterday instead of 47 years ago. Michael told me about learning to surf in his 50s, about the year he'd spent traveling through Italy, about the garden he was planning for the spring. I found myself telling him things I hadn't shared with anyone. My fear of becoming invisible as I aged, my struggles with loneliness, my worry that I'd somehow failed as a mother because my children lived their own busy lives and called only on weekends. "You didn't fail," Michael said firmly when I voiced this particular anxiety. "Your children are independent, successful, happy. That's not failure, that's success. You raised them to have their own lives, not to need you constantly." "But I miss being needed." "Then maybe you need to find new people to need you, new purposes, new passions. His smile was gentle but challenging. Maybe you need to stop being so afraid of wanting things for yourself. There it was again, the push to be braver, to want more. It was exactly what had scared me about Michael all those years ago, and it still scared me now. But it also thrilled me in ways I'd forgotten were possible. When we finally left the cafe, the sun was high and warm despite the October air. We walked slowly down Main Street, past shops that had been there when we were young, and new ones that spoke to the town's gradual evolution. "Would you like to see something?" Michael asked as we paused outside the old movie theater. "What?" "My mother's house. It's just a few blocks from here. I'm trying to decide what to do with it. Sell it, keep it, renovate it. I could use a woman's perspective." The invitation felt significant, like crossing a threshold from public reconnection to private intimacy, but I found myself nodding before I could overthink it. We walked through the neighborhood where we'd both grown up, past houses that held decades of memories. The Brennan house sat on a corner lot, a modest two-story colonial with a wraparound porch and mature oak trees that had grown substantial since I'd last seen them. "It needs work," Michael said as we approached the front steps, "but the bones are good." He unlocked the door, and we stepped into a time capsule. The house smelled of old wood and lavender sachets, and the furniture was exactly as I remembered it from my teenage years, floral prints and dark wood and doilies on every surface. "She never changed anything," Michael said softly, following my gaze around the living room. "Even kept your picture on the mantel." I turned to where he was pointing and gasped. There, among family photos and graduation pictures, was the same photo I'd been looking at in my kitchen the night before. Michael and me at the college picnic, young and laughing, and completely unaware that we were living in borrowed time. "She always hoped," Michael said, moving to stand behind me. "Even after you married Thomas, even after all these years, she'd ask about you, wonder if you were happy." I could feel the warmth of his body behind me, could smell his familiar scent. Different aftershave now, but underneath it, the essential Michael smell that had once made me dizzy with wanting. If I leaned back just slightly, I'd be pressed against his chest, and the temptation to do exactly that was overwhelming. Instead, I stepped forward, putting distance between us before I did something we weren't ready for. "The house is lovely," I said, my voice slightly breathless. "With some updating, it could be beautiful. Would you like to see the rest?" I nodded, not trusting my voice, and followed him through rooms that held echoes of the boy I'd loved. Here was the kitchen where his mother had made us countless meals, always insisting I was too thin and needed feeding. Here was the dining room, where we'd study together, books spread across the table, while we argued about literature and politics and the future we were going to build together. Upstairs, Michael hesitated outside what I knew was his old bedroom. "I'm using this as a guest room now," he said, opening the door to reveal a space that had been completely transformed. Gone were the band posters and college pennants, replaced by neutral colors and grown-up furniture. But the window still looked out over the same view, the backyard where we'd sat under the old apple tree, making plans and promises we'd been too young to keep. "I used to watch for your car from that window," Michael said quietly. "Count the minutes until you'd arrive." The memory hit me like a physical blow. All those afternoons when I'd driven over after my classes, so eager to see him that I'd speed through town with my heart racing. I'd felt so alive then, so connected to possibility and passion, and the sheer exhilarating terror of loving someone completely. "Michael." I turned to face him, and the expression in his eyes made my breath catch. He was looking at me the way he used to, like I was something precious and miraculous, like I held all the answers to questions he hadn't learned to ask yet. "I know," he said softly. I know this is complicated and impossible and probably crazy. It is all of those things. But I took a shaky breath, hardly believing I was about to say what I was thinking. But maybe crazy isn't always bad. Maybe sometimes crazy is just another word for brave. He stepped closer then, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes, could count the lines that time had etched around them, close enough that when he reached up to touch my face, I didn't pull away. "Margaret," he whispered, and my name on his lips was a question and a prayer and a promise all at once. I should have stepped back, should have reminded us both that we were too old for this kind of drama, too set in our ways for grand romantic gestures. Should have thought about my children, about what people would say, about the practical complications of trying to rebuild a relationship after nearly 50 years apart. Instead, I stood on my tiptoes and kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, like we were both afraid the other might disappear. But then his arms came around me, and I melted into him like no time had passed at all, like my body remembered exactly how to fit against his. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard, both staring at each other with wonder and amazement and just a little bit of fear. "Oh," I said weakly. "Yeah. Oh." We stood there in his mother's guest room, holding each other and trying to process what had just happened. I felt like I was 17 again, dizzy with first love and the intoxicating possibility of forever. But I was also 67, old enough to know that forever was a luxury we might not have, that whatever this was between us would have to be built on the understanding that time was both precious and finite. "What happens now?" I asked, echoing the question from the night before. "Now we figure it out as we go along," Michael said, his arms still around me. "Now we stop being afraid of wanting something for ourselves." "I don't know how to do this," I admitted. "I don't know how to be someone's girlfriend at 67. "Then maybe you don't have to be my girlfriend. Maybe you just have to be Margaret, and I'll just be Michael, and we'll see what that looks like." The simplicity of it was both appealing and terrifying. No labels, no expectations, just two people who'd found each other again against all odds and were brave enough to see where it led. "Okay," I said, surprising myself with the word. "Okay? Okay, let's see what this looks like." Michael's smile was radiant, transforming his whole face. "In that case, Margaret Sullivan, would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow night?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Yes, I would." The next few weeks passed in a blur of dinners and walks and long conversations that stretched late into the evening. Michael courted me the way men used to court women, with flowers and handwritten notes and careful attention to my comfort and happiness. But there was also a modern sensibility to it, an understanding that I was a complete person with my own life and interests, not someone who needed to be rescued or completed. We went to movies and art galleries and the autumn festival in the town square. We drove to the lake where we'd spent so many afternoons as college students and walked along the shore while leaves drifted down around us like confetti. We had dinner at Romano's again, partly because the food was good and partly because we were drawn to the scene of our impossible reunion. I met some of his friends from the community center and he met mine from book club. The reactions were mixed. Some people were thrilled by the romantic second chance story. Others were more skeptical about the wisdom of rekindling an old flame. My daughter Sarah was particularly concerned, worried that I was moving too fast, that I wasn't thinking clearly. "Mom, are you sure about this?" she asked during one of our weekly coffee dates. I mean, it's very romantic and all, but do you really know this man anymore? People change a lot in 47 years. Yes, they do, I agreed, but some things don't change. Some connections are strong enough to survive decades apart. But what if they're not? What if you're just remembering what you felt when you were 20 instead of seeing who he really is now? It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself repeatedly. But every day I spent with Michael, I became more convinced that while we'd both grown and changed, the essential compatibility between us had survived intact. We still made each other laugh. We still challenged each other intellectually. We still had the same values, the same approach to life, the same ability to talk for hours without running out of things to say. And yes, there was still the physical attraction that had nearly derailed my entire life when I was young. If anything, it had deepened with age, become more complex and nuanced. The passion was still there, but it was tempered with appreciation for the gift of connection at this stage of life, when most people assumed romance was behind them. We'd been dating, though we still didn't call it that, for 3 weeks when Michael asked me a question that changed everything. We were sitting on his mother's front porch, drinking wine, and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The October air was getting crisp, and I'd borrowed one of his sweaters, a soft gray cardigan that smelled like him and made me feel cherished and protected. "Margaret," he said, his voice unusually serious, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." My heart skipped, the way it always did when conversations took unexpected turns. "Okay. Are you happy? I mean, really happy, not just content or comfortable or making the best of things. Are you happy?" I considered the question, surprised by how difficult it was to answer. Happiness seemed like such a simple concept, but when I really examined it, I realized I hadn't thought about my own happiness in years. During Thomas's illness, happiness had felt selfish, inappropriate. After his death, it had felt impossible, like something that belonged to my past rather than my future. But sitting on that porch, wearing Michael's sweater, and watching him watch me with patient, loving eyes, I realized something had shifted. The constant ache of grief was still there, probably always would be, but alongside it was something I'd almost forgotten existed: anticipation, joy, the breathless excitement of wondering what tomorrow might bring. "Yes," I said, surprised by the certainty in my voice. "Yes, I think I am." "Good, because I have a proposition for you." "I'm listening." Michael turned his body to face me fully, his expression earnest and hopeful and terrified all at once. "Come to California with me." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "What?" "Come to California with me. I've been thinking about it for weeks, ever since that first night at dinner. I have friends there, a life I built over 30 years. There's an art studio I could rent for you, beaches we could walk, adventures we could have." His words came faster now, tumbling over each other in his excitement. "I know it sounds crazy. I know it's a lot to ask, but Margaret, what if we just did it? What if we threw caution to the wind and took that leap we were too scared to take when we were young?" California, the dream that had terrified me so much I'd left him standing at the altar rather than chase it. And now, 47 years later, he was offering it to me again. "Michael, I can't just pack up and move across the country. I have a life here, responsibilities, my children, my grandchildren. Would be happy for you if they really thought about it. They want you to be happy, Margaret, not to spend the rest of your life maintaining Thomas's memory like a shrine." The words stung because they were true. Since Thomas's death, I'd become a professional widow, defining myself entirely by what I'd lost rather than what I still had to gain. "Besides," Michael continued, "it doesn't have to be permanent. We could try it for 6 months, see how it feels. If you hate it, if you're miserable, we come back. But if you love it, he let the possibility hang in the air between us. If I love it, then what? Then we build something new, something that's ours, not a recreation of what we had before or a competition with what you had with Thomas, something completely fresh. I felt dizzy with the magnitude of what he was suggesting. To leave everything familiar, everything safe, to chase a dream at 67 years old? It was exactly the kind of reckless, romantic gesture that my practical mind rejected immediately. But my heart was singing. I need to think about it, I said, which was code for I need to find reasons to say no, and we both knew it. Of course you do. Take all the time you need. But Margaret, Michael reached over and took my hand, don't think so hard that you talk yourself out of living. That night, I called Emma. If anyone would understand the appeal of a dramatic romantic gesture, it would be my granddaughter.